Stop for a moment, because this may be the exact interruption you asked for without realizing it. You were not supposed to see this tonight by accident. Something inside you has been carrying a weight that nobody fully notices. Not your family, not your coworkers, not even the people who say they care about you. You learned how to smile at the right moments, answer messages with one-word replies, and pretend you were just tired when in reality your mind has been running in circles for weeks, maybe even longer. And lately the silence has felt different. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence. The kind that follows you into the kitchen at midnight while the refrigerator hums in the background and your phone screen lights up a dark room with no new notifications. The kind that makes a 10-minute drive home feel like 10 miles of overthinking. You have been asking questions you never say out loud. Why does everything feel delayed? Why do doors keep closing right when you thought life was finally moving forward? Why did certain people suddenly disappear after promising they would never leave? And why does it feel like something important is slipping away from you even though you cannot explain exactly what it is? Listen carefully, because the truth is deeper than you think. Not every delay in your life was punishment. Not every closed door was rejection. There were moments you thought life was ignoring you when something invisible was actually protecting you from becoming trapped in places you were never meant to stay. But you could not see that yet, because pain has a way of making silence feel personal. That is why some nights lately have felt strangely emotional for no reason. You sit on the edge of your bed exhausted, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above you, wondering why your spirit feels restless even when your body is tired. You replay conversations in your head. You think about the opportunities that vanished, the text message you deleted before sending, the call you almost made, the decision you almost rushed into because you were tired of waiting. And what you still do not understand is how close you came to walking into something that would have broken you even more deeply. There is a reason your plans kept changing. There is a reason certain paths suddenly stopped working. There is a reason this message found you now instead of 6 months ago. Because if you had heard this earlier, you would not have listened. Back then you still believed your biggest problem was getting what you wanted. But now, after all the disappointment, the silence, the sleepless nights, and the feeling of slowly disconnecting from yourself, you are finally beginning to realize your real fear was never failure. It was becoming numb enough to stop hoping completely. And right before that happened, something interrupted your night. The strange part is that nobody around you realized how close you were to emotionally shutting down. From the outside, your life still looked normal enough. You showed up to work. You answered people when they spoke to you. You paid your bills, folded laundry, stopped for gas, and carried on conversations about things you did not truly care about. But inside, something felt disconnected. Like you had been surviving on autopilot for so long that you forgot what peace actually felt like. And lately, the exhaustion has not just been physical. It has settled deeper than sleep can fix. You noticed it in the quiet moments most. Like standing in the grocery store aisle staring at shelves without remembering what you came there for. Or sitting in your apartment after midnight with the television running only for background noise because the silence felt too loud. There have been moments when your chest tightened for no clear reason. Moments when your thoughts became so heavy that even simple decisions felt impossible. And what confused you most was that nothing looked dramatic enough to justify feeling this lost. That is why you kept telling yourself you were just overthinking, just stressed, just tired. But deep down you knew something else was happening. Because there were too many moments that felt strangely timed to ignore completely. Like the morning you almost accepted something you had prayed for months to receive, only for everything to suddenly fall apart at the last second. At the time it felt humiliating. You remember sitting in your car afterward, gripping the steering wheel while rain tapped softly against the windshield, trying to understand why life kept pulling things away from you right when you started believing again. You thought that moment meant you were forgotten. But what if that disappointment was actually interruption? What if the things leaving your life were not proof you were unworthy, but proof that something unseen was refusing to let you settle for what would eventually damage you? That possibility has followed you quietly ever since, even when you tried to ignore it. Because if you are honest, there were warning signs you felt long before certain people disappeared. There were conversations that left your spirit uneasy even while you smiled through them. There were opportunities that looked perfect on paper, but somehow drained the life out of you every time you imagined accepting them. Still, you kept pushing forward because you were afraid that saying no would leave you with nothing. That fear changed you slowly. It made you cling to situations that no longer felt right. It made you question your own instincts. It made you wonder if waiting had simply become another word for losing. But over the last few weeks, something has shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, in small moments you almost dismissed. A sudden memory appearing at exactly the right time. A delayed plan that now feels strangely fortunate. A feeling in your spirit telling you to slow down even when your mind wanted answers immediately. And tonight, sitting here hearing these words while the rest of the world keeps moving around you, there is a part of you beginning to realize that maybe the silence was never empty after all. You have spent so much time trying to appear strong that almost nobody noticed how tired your spirit had become. Not the kind of tired that disappears after a weekend off or a full night of sleep, but the kind that follows you into every room no matter where you go. It sits quietly behind your smile during conversations. It waits beside you during the drive home while streetlights blur across the windshield. It stays with you when you wake up at 3 in the morning for no reason and stare into the darkness feeling like your mind cannot fully rest anymore. And somewhere along the way, you stopped expecting things to get better. You started preparing yourself for disappointment before anything even happened because it hurt less that way. That is what waiting too long without answers does to a person. It changes how they see everything. You began calling your numbness maturity. You called your distance peace. You told yourself you no longer cared because hoping had become exhausting. But there is something important you still do not fully understand. The reason certain things kept falling apart in your hands was not because your life was cursed. It was because you were trying to force yourself into places your spirit already knew were wrong for you. Think about it carefully. Every time you ignored that deep feeling inside, things became heavier. Every time you convinced yourself to settle for less than what truly brought peace, anxiety followed close behind. There were nights when you sat in silence replaying conversations over and over, wondering why certain people could not love you the way you loved them. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt harder than it should have, even though nothing terrible had technically happened. And still you blamed yourself for feeling disconnected. But your spirit was reacting to something your mind had not accepted yet. Some things had to leave your life because they were slowly draining who you were becoming. You remember that afternoon not long ago when you almost sent the message asking someone to come back into your life. Your thumb hovered over the screen for nearly a minute before something inside told you to stop. At first you thought it was pride, then fear. But later that night, sitting alone with only the kitchen light glowing across the apartment, you felt a strange calm settle over you for the first time in weeks. You could not explain it then, but now you are beginning to see it differently. Not every silence is rejection. Sometimes silence is protection from reopening wounds that were finally beginning to close. And maybe that is why life has felt so confusing lately. Part of you wants immediate answers, while another part of you senses that rushing ahead would only create more emptiness. That tension inside you has become impossible to ignore. One side wants certainty right now. The other side keeps whispering to slow down, breathe, and pay attention to what keeps repeating in your life. Because there is a pattern hidden underneath all this disappointment. A pattern you were never meant to recognize until now. And once you finally see it clearly, you will understand why so many things had to fall apart before your spirit could finally wake up. The hardest part about this season of your life has not been the disappointment itself. It has been the confusion, the constant questioning, the exhausting cycle of trying to understand why things that once felt certain suddenly became unstable. You have replayed so many moments in your head searching for the exact place where everything changed. Sometimes you blame yourself for trusting too much. Other times you wonder if you should have fought harder for people who slowly drifted away. But deep inside, there is another feeling you rarely admit out loud. A feeling that some part of you already knew those things were never meant to stay forever. That realization has followed you quietly for months now. You feel it during ordinary moments. Standing at the sink washing dishes while your thoughts wander somewhere else. Sitting at a red light late at night, with music playing softly through the speakers while the city around you feels strangely distant. There is a quiet tension inside you because your heart keeps trying to return to places your spirit has already outgrown. That is why certain memories suddenly hit you harder at night. Not because you truly want to go backward, but because part of you misses who you were before life became so heavy. Before the waiting, before the unanswered questions, before disappointment taught you to guard your emotions so carefully. And lately it feels like the world keeps asking you to keep moving while your soul is begging you to pause. You can feel it in the exhaustion that settles over you after being around certain people. You can feel it in the way your body tenses whenever you try forcing yourself into situations that no longer bring peace. There was a time when you ignored those feelings completely. You told yourself you were being dramatic, sensitive, emotional. But now you are starting to understand that your spirit notices things long before your mind accepts them. Think about the opportunities that disappeared unexpectedly. At first they felt like losses. You remember checking your email over and over, waiting for good news that never arrived. You remember staring at your phone hoping for a response that stayed unread for days. Those moments wounded your confidence more deeply than you admitted to anyone. But if those doors had opened when you desperately wanted them to, your life would have moved in directions that looked successful on the outside while quietly destroying your peace on the inside. You could not see that then because all you focused on was what you lost. But now, looking back honestly, you can finally admit there were moments when your spirit felt uneasy even while you were chasing those things. There were warning signs hidden inside the pressure, the anxiety, the constant need to prove yourself. Still, you kept pushing because waiting made you feel forgotten. That is what made this season so emotionally dangerous. Not the delays themselves, but the fear that maybe your life was never going to change. That fear almost convinced you to settle. Almost convinced you to stop listening to the quiet voice inside that kept telling you there was more ahead for you than constant emotional survival. And maybe that is why things had to become uncomfortable enough for you to finally pay attention. Because sometimes people do not awaken through clarity. Sometimes they awaken through exhaustion, through silence, through realizing they cannot keep carrying relationships, expectations, and versions of themselves that no longer feel alive. And tonight, whether you fully understand it yet or not, something inside you is finally beginning to let go of what was never truly meant for you. What unsettles you the most lately is not the waiting itself. It is the growing. Feeling that your old life no longer fits the person you are becoming. You notice it in small moments that nobody else would think twice about. The way crowded places suddenly drain you faster than before. The way certain conversations feel empty even when everyone around you is laughing. The way you instinctively pull away from noise because your spirit has become exhausted from pretending. There was a time when distractions worked. You could keep yourself busy enough to avoid facing what was happening inside you. Endless scrolling, late-night television, driving around aimlessly just to avoid sitting alone with your thoughts. But now even distractions feel temporary. The silence always returns. And when it does, it forces you to notice what you have been avoiding. You have outgrown parts of your life that once felt permanent. That truth has been unfolding slowly, almost painfully, because part of you still wants to hold on to familiar things even when they no longer bring peace. You can feel the tension between who you were and who you are becoming. One side of you wants comfort, predictability, and immediate reassurance. The other side senses that something deeper is happening beneath all this confusion, even if you cannot fully explain it yet. That inner conflict has become stronger at night, especially during those quiet drives home after long days when the streets are mostly empty and the glow of traffic lights reflects across the dashboard. You replay memories differently now, not with the same desperation to fix everything, but with growing awareness. You are beginning to notice how many times life quietly redirected you before things became worse. Think about the people you begged to stay in your life. At the time, their distance felt unbearable. You questioned your worth because of how suddenly things changed. But now, looking back honestly, you can admit that your spirit rarely felt calm around them for very long. There was always tension beneath the surface, always uncertainty, always the exhausting feeling that you had to earn love by overextending yourself emotionally. And still you kept trying because losing them felt more frightening than losing yourself. That is the part nobody saw. How much energy you spent trying to preserve things that were slowly breaking your spirit. You remember one particular night a few months ago when you sat alone in your apartment after everyone had gone quiet. Your phone battery was nearly dead. The clock on the microwave read 1:13 a.m. You had spent hours overthinking a conversation that left you feeling small and emotionally drained. And in that moment, something inside you whispered that you could not keep living this way forever. Not the anxiety, not the emotional exhaustion, not the constant fear of being abandoned if you stopped giving every piece of yourself away. That moment mattered more than you realized, because it was one of the first times your spirit stopped begging for outside validation and started recognizing its own exhaustion. And since then, life has been slowly removing illusions you once depended on, not to punish you, but to wake you up before you completely lost yourself inside patterns that were never sustainable. That is why certain doors continue closing no matter how hard you try forcing them open. Not because you are unwanted, but because your life is being redirected away from things that can no longer carry the weight of who you are becoming. There is a reason you have felt emotionally suspended between two versions of your life lately. One version still wants to hold on to what feels familiar, even if it drains you. The other version is quietly awakening, sensing that you cannot continue living the same way without losing something important inside yourself. That tension has followed you everywhere recently. You feel it the moment your alarm goes off in the morning. You feel it while sitting in traffic watching strangers cross the street under fading streetlights. You feel it when your phone lights up with messages from people who know how to reach you physically, but have never truly understood what has been happening inside you. And the more you try ignoring it, the stronger it becomes. Because your spirit has reached a point where pretending no longer works the way it used to. There was a time when you could silence your intuition by staying busy. You could drown out your exhaustion with distractions and temporary comforts. But now, even in crowded rooms, you still feel the quiet ache underneath everything. It follows you home at night. It sits beside you while you stare out the window wondering why life suddenly feels so different from what you imagined it would become. You keep asking yourself why everything feels delayed while everyone else seems to be moving forward. Why certain prayers remain unanswered. Why opportunities disappear right when you finally gather the courage to believe again. But what if the delay itself has been part of the rescue all along? That thought has started appearing in your mind more often lately, especially when you revisit moments that once felt devastating. You remember how crushed you felt when one particular opportunity disappeared unexpectedly. At first, you could not stop replaying it in your head. You thought about what you should have said differently, what you could have done better, how close you believed you were to finally escaping the emotional exhaustion that had followed you for so long. But months later, after seeing how certain situations unfolded around the people involved, you quietly realized something that unsettled you deeply. If that door had opened when you wanted it to, your life would have become entangled in chaos you were never meant to carry. That realization changed something inside you. Not instantly, slowly, quietly, like the first small light appearing before sunrise. And now you are beginning to recognize this pattern everywhere. The relationships that ended before they destroyed your peace completely. The plans that collapsed before they trapped you in the wrong direction. The delays that forced you to slow down long enough to confront the loneliness and exhaustion you had been avoiding for years. None of those moments felt merciful while they were happening. They felt painful, confusing, unfair. But looking back now, you can sense that something invisible kept intervening every time you were about to settle for less than what your spirit truly needed. That is why your life has felt so emotionally intense lately. Not because you are being abandoned, but because you are being separated from patterns that can no longer follow you where you are headed next. And even though part of you still fears the unknown, another part of you is quietly beginning to trust the strange timing of everything that fell apart. The truth is, you came much closer to giving up than anyone around you realized. Not giving up on life in some dramatic way, but giving up quietly, emotionally, spiritually. The kind of surrender that happens slowly over time when disappointment becomes routine and hope starts feeling dangerous. You stopped expecting good news because it hurt too much when things fell apart again. You stopped talking about your dreams because you grew tired of explaining delays you could not understand yourself. Even your prayers changed. They became shorter, quieter, more exhausted. Some nights you did not even know what to ask for anymore. You would just sit there in silence, staring at the dim light from your phone across the room, too mentally drained to form the words you once spoke with confidence. And yet, despite all of that, something inside you refused to completely shut down. That is the part you still cannot explain, because there were moments when you truly believed you had reached your limit. Like that night not long ago when you drove 20 minutes out of your way after work just to avoid going home to an empty apartment that no longer felt comforting. You parked near a quiet gas station off the highway while cold air pressed against the windows and distant headlights passed by every few minutes. You sat there gripping the steering wheel with tired eyes, replaying every disappointment from the last few years, wondering how your life had become so emotionally heavy without anyone noticing. And in that moment, you almost convinced yourself that nothing was ever going to change, that this exhaustion was simply who you had become now. But then something strange happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet feeling that settled over you for a few seconds. A stillness you had not felt in months. It did not solve your problems instantly. It did not answer every question, but it interrupted the spiral long enough for you to breathe again. You dismissed it at first because your mind has spent so long searching for logical explanations for everything. But that moment stayed with you afterward, especially because similar moments kept happening. Small interruptions arriving exactly when your thoughts became darkest. A memory appearing at the right time. A delayed plan suddenly making sense weeks later. A random conversation giving you clarity you did not know you needed. It has been happening more often than you realize. Because even during the periods when you felt abandoned, something unseen kept reaching into your life through quiet moments, trying to stop you from losing yourself completely. That is why the emotional tension inside you has grown so intense recently. Part of you is still clinging to the belief that your delays mean failure. But another part is beginning to recognize that every interruption may have been protecting you from a future that would have left you even more broken. And now you are standing in a strange place emotionally. Too awake to return to who you used to be, but not fully certain yet about where you are headed next. That uncertainty scares you sometimes. It makes the silence feel heavy again. But beneath the fear, there is also something else beginning to emerge. Something quieter, steadier. A growing realization that maybe your life was never falling apart randomly. Maybe you were being redirected the entire time without fully seeing it until now. What you are beginning to realize now changes everything you thought the silence meant. Because the delays that frustrated you the most were not random obstacles standing in your way. They were interruptions. Protection that did not feel like protection while you were living through it. That is why certain situations became so confusing. Your mind kept interpreting closed doors as rejection, while your spirit was trying to pull you away from things that would have wounded you more deeply later. You only saw what you lost in the moment. You did not see what you were being spared from. But now the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. Think about how many times your plans suddenly collapsed right before you became fully attached to them. The relationship that seemed perfect at first until small cracks started revealing deeper emotional distance. The opportunity you begged for that disappeared unexpectedly, only for you to later discover how unstable it truly was behind the surface. The conversations that left you feeling emotionally drained no matter how hard you tried to convince yourself otherwise. Back then you called those moments setbacks. Now you are starting to see them differently. You were being redirected before temporary comfort became permanent damage. And perhaps the hardest part of this awakening is realizing how often you ignored your own inner warnings because loneliness made you desperate for certainty. You wanted something solid to hold on to so badly that you almost accepted environments that slowly disconnected you from yourself. That is why your spirit became so exhausted. It was carrying the weight of pretending things were fine when deep down you already sensed they were not. You remember the morning you woke up feeling strangely relieved after something important fell apart. At first the feeling made no sense. You thought you should have been devastated. Instead, you sat quietly on the edge of your bed with sunlight pushing softly through the blinds, feeling an unfamiliar stillness settle inside your chest. It was subtle, but real, almost like your spirit knew before your mind did that something harmful had finally passed you by. That moment mattered more than you realized, because it revealed something your fear had hidden from you for a very long time. Not everything that leaves your life is a loss. Some things leave because they were never meant to continue into the next chapter of who you are becoming. And now, looking back honestly, you can see how many times life intervened when you were too emotionally overwhelmed to protect yourself properly. The delays, the unanswered prayers, the sudden endings, even the painful silence. None of it felt merciful while it was happening. But if everything had unfolded exactly when you wanted it to, you would have attached yourself permanently to situations that were only meant to teach you temporary lessons. That realization creates a strange emotional shift inside you. because part of you still grieves what could have been, while another part finally understands why certain things could never fully work no matter how much effort you gave them. That is the internal conflict you have been carrying lately. One side of you mourns the life you imagined. The other side is slowly awakening to the possibility that your life was quietly being preserved for something more aligned with your peace. And for the first time in a long while, you are beginning to sense that maybe the silence was never punishment at all. Maybe it was preparation happening underneath everything you could not yet understand. There are some losses you still think about more than you admit to anyone. Certain names, certain memories, certain moments that return to your mind late at night when the world becomes quiet enough for your real emotions to surface again. You tell yourself you have moved on, but sometimes all it takes is hearing a familiar song in a grocery store or passing a street you used to drive down together for the ache to return unexpectedly. And the hardest part has been trying to understand why things that once felt so meaningful could disappear so suddenly from your life. You spent months trying to make sense of endings that never gave you proper closure. You replayed conversations searching for hidden explanations. You blamed yourself for not being enough, not saying the right thing, not fixing things before they slipped away. But what if some endings happened because your spirit could no longer survive inside the version of life you were desperately trying to preserve? That thought has become harder to ignore lately, especially because the more distance you gain from certain situations, the more clearly you begin to see what your emotions once hid from you. You remember how emotionally exhausted you became trying to maintain connections that constantly left you anxious. You remember checking your phone repeatedly hoping for reassurance that never lasted long enough to bring peace. You remember how heavy your chest felt before certain conversations even began because deep down you already knew something was off. But loneliness has a way of making people tolerate emotional confusion longer than they should. You kept hoping things would eventually feel safe if you just tried harder. And for a while, you convinced yourself that struggle was proof of love, that constant emotional instability was normal, that carrying the weight of everyone else while neglecting yourself was simply part of being loyal. But your spirit was slowly weakening underneath that pressure. That is why certain separations had to happen even though they broke your heart at the time. You could not fully become who you were meant to become while constantly shrinking yourself to fit environments that no longer aligned with your peace. There was one particular evening you still think about sometimes. You came home emotionally drained after pretending all day that everything was fine. You tossed your keys onto the kitchen counter, sat down in silence, and stared at the faint city lights outside your apartment window while feeling completely disconnected from yourself. And for the first time, instead of chasing after someone who had emotionally pulled away from you, you simply sat there and let the silence exist. No desperate message, no explanation, no attempt to force clarity from someone unwilling to give it. Just silence. Painful silence at first. But underneath it, something else slowly emerged. Relief. Not because losing people stopped hurting, but because deep down you were exhausted from fighting to hold together things that were already slipping apart. That moment changed you more than you realized, because it marked the beginning of something your fear had resisted for a very long time. Acceptance. Not passive acceptance. Honest acceptance. The kind that allows you to finally stop chasing what continually destroys your peace. And now, as you look back on everything that left your life unexpectedly, you are beginning to understand something that once felt impossible to believe. Some things were removed not to empty your life, but to create space for the version of you that could no longer keep surviving on emotional exhaustion alone. You were never meant to hear these truths earlier because earlier versions of you would have misunderstood them completely. Back then, all you wanted was immediate relief, immediate answers, immediate reassurance that your life was finally moving in the right direction. You believed peace would come from getting everything you asked for exactly when you wanted it. But if that had happened, you would have continued building your future around things that were quietly exhausting your spirit. That is why so much of your life had to slow down before this deeper understanding could finally reach you. Because sometimes clarity only arrives after disappointment strips away the illusions you once depended on. And now, after everything you have lived through recently, you are finally able to see what was hidden underneath the delays all along. The interruptions were never there to destroy your future. They were there to prevent you from abandoning yourself completely in the pursuit of temporary comfort. That realization feels uncomfortable at first because it forces you to confront how close you came to settling for emotional survival instead of genuine peace. Think about how different you have become over the last year alone. The old version of you would have chased people harder, ignored your intuition longer, tolerated situations that slowly drained your energy just to avoid feeling alone. But now something inside you pauses before repeating old patterns. You notice tension sooner. You recognize emotional instability faster. You no longer ignore the heaviness in your spirit simply because something looks good from the outside. That change did not happen accidentally. It was formed through every delayed answer, every lonely night, every moment you thought you were being forgotten, while something deeper was quietly reshaping your understanding of yourself. You remember that morning recently when you woke up before sunrise for no clear reason. The apartment was silent except for the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. You walked into the kitchen half awake, poured a glass of water, and stood there staring into the darkness outside while an unexpected thought crossed your mind. For the first time in a long while, you realized you did not want your old life back anymore. Not because it never mattered, but because you finally understood how much of yourself you lost trying to maintain it. That moment startled you, because grief had become so familiar that you forgot healing could arrive quietly too. Not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through subtle moments when your spirit finally stops resisting reality. And perhaps that is the real reason this season has felt so emotionally intense. You were not just losing people, plans, or expectations. You were shedding old versions of yourself that could no longer continue where your life is heading next. That process feels lonely sometimes because transformation often happens in silence long before anyone else notices it. But underneath the loneliness, something important has been returning to you slowly. Your discernment, your inner stillness, your ability to recognize what truly brings peace instead of temporary distraction. And now the message hidden beneath all the delays is finally becoming clear. You were never being punished through silence. You were being protected long enough to become someone capable of recognizing the difference between what merely comforts you and what genuinely aligns with your spirit. For a long time, you believed the greatest danger in your life was losing people, missing opportunities, or watching your plans fall apart. But now you are beginning to understand something much deeper. The real danger was losing your connection to yourself while trying to hold everything together. That was the battle happening underneath all the delays and disappointments. Not simply whether things would work out, but whether you would completely lose hope before discovering who you were becoming through all of it. And if you are honest, there were moments when you came dangerously close. Moments when emotional exhaustion made you question everything. Moments when the silence became so heavy that you wondered if anyone truly saw the weight you had been carrying. You became skilled at hiding it. Most people never noticed how many nights you spent lying awake replaying conversations in your mind or wondering why life felt emotionally distant no matter how hard you tried to stay positive. They saw you functioning, smiling politely, showing up when expected, but they did not see the loneliness underneath your routines. They did not see how many times you sat alone in your car after work, gathering enough emotional energy just to walk inside your apartment and pretend another night of silence did not bother you. Yet somehow, even during those moments, something always stopped you from completely collapsing inward. Not through loud miracles or dramatic signs, but through subtle interruptions that arrived exactly when your spirit needed them most. A strange feeling of calm during your worst nights. A memory appearing at the right time. A conversation that unexpectedly shifted your perspective for a few minutes. Tiny moments most people would dismiss as coincidence, but they kept happening too consistently to ignore forever. And now you are finally starting to see them differently. You were never truly alone inside the silence the way you once believed. Something unseen was quietly walking with you through every season you thought you had to survive entirely by yourself. That realization changes how you look at your past, because suddenly the moments that once seemed empty begin carrying different meaning. The delays protected you. The silence refined you. The loneliness exposed where you had been depending on people and outcomes to give you the peace only inner alignment could provide. Even your exhaustion served a purpose. It forced you to stop running from yourself long enough to finally hear what your spirit had been trying to tell you all along. You remember that recent Sunday morning when you woke up unusually early, and sat near the window with coffee growing cold in your hands while soft gray light filled the room. Nothing dramatic happened. No life-changing event. But for the first time in months, your thoughts were quiet enough for you to breathe without feeling pressure in your chest. And in that small moment, you realized something important. Peace had started returning before your circumstances fully changed. That truth surprised you because you spent so long believing peace could only exist after every problem disappeared. But now you are beginning to understand that real healing often begins quietly beneath the surface before the outside world catches up to it. And maybe that is why this entire season had to unfold the way it did. Not to destroy your faith in life, but to rebuild your connection to yourself in a way that no longer depends on constant external reassurance. Because where you are headed next requires a stronger kind of peace than the temporary comfort you once chased so desperately. What finally changed you was not one dramatic moment. It was the slow realization that you could no longer continue living disconnected from your own spirit. For so long you believed your greatest struggle was waiting for life to improve, waiting for answers, waiting for the right people to stay, waiting for circumstances to finally make sense. But underneath all that waiting, something even more important was happening quietly inside you. You were learning the difference between being emotionally attached to something and being genuinely aligned with it. And once you begin recognizing that difference, you cannot unsee it anymore. That is why certain environments now feel heavier than they used to. That is why your tolerance for emotional confusion has started disappearing. You spent years trying to convince yourself that exhaustion was normal, that anxiety was simply part of caring deeply, that constantly feeling unsettled around certain people or situations was something you just had to accept. But your spirit kept resisting those lies no matter how hard you tried to silence it. The exhaustion was never random. It was a signal. Your inner self was warning you every time you moved further away from peace in order to maintain temporary comfort. And perhaps the most painful truth you have had to face is this. The thing you were actually losing all along was not opportunities, relationships, or time. It was hope. Quietly, gradually, through repeated disappointment and emotional survival mode, you started disconnecting from the part of yourself that once believed life could still become meaningful again. That is why the silence felt so dangerous. Not because nothing was happening, but because you feared becoming permanently numb inside it. You feared waking up one day no longer recognizing yourself emotionally. But look at what has happened instead. Despite every delayed answer, every lonely night, every painful ending, something inside you continued searching for peace. Even when you felt exhausted, you kept listening for meaning. Even when disappointment hardened parts of your heart, you still noticed moments of beauty others would overlook. A sunrise during an early drive to work, rain against the windows while the apartment stayed quiet, the strange comfort of sitting alone at night without needing to explain yourself to anyone. Those moments mattered more than you realized because they were quietly reconnecting you to yourself again. Healing did not arrive the way you expected. It did not come through suddenly getting everything you wanted. It arrived through awareness, through slowly understanding why certain things had to end, through realizing that many of your delays were actually preserving your future from paths that would have deepened your emptiness instead of healing it. And now, even though your life may still feel uncertain in some ways, you are no longer standing in the exact same emotional darkness you were trapped in before. There is more clarity inside you now, more discernment, more honesty about what your spirit truly needs. You no longer crave chaos disguised as passion. You no longer feel the same desperation to chase what continuously disturbs your peace. Something inside you has matured through all this silence. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to recognize that your life was never falling apart as randomly as you once feared. You were slowly being guided away from versions of yourself that could only survive through emotional exhaustion, and toward a quieter kind of strength that does not need constant validation to know it is finally healing. Tonight feels different to you, even if you cannot fully explain why yet. Not because every problem in your life suddenly disappeared, or because all your questions finally have answers, but because something inside you has quietly shifted. The weight you have been carrying for so long no longer feels exactly the same. It is still there in some ways, but it no longer owns you the way it once did. And maybe that is the clearest sign of all that this season was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to wake you up before you completely disappeared inside exhaustion, disappointment, and emotional survival. For the first time in a long while, you are beginning to understand that peace was never waiting for you at the end of perfect circumstances. It was growing slowly within you during all the moments you thought nothing meaningful was happening, during the silent drives home, during the lonely nights when you sat awake questioning your future, during the mornings when you forced yourself to keep going even though your spirit felt tired beyond words. Every one of those moments shaped something deeper inside you. You just could not see it clearly while you were still living through the confusion. But now the pattern feels undeniable. The things that left your life were not all punishments. The delays were not all rejection. The silence was not abandonment. So much of what hurt you was actually separating you from environments, people, and versions of yourself that could not continue into the life you are slowly growing toward now. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that this transformation did not happen through force. It happened quietly, through awareness, through exhaustion finally teaching you what peace is not. You notice it in simple moments now. The way your mind no longer races as intensely over things you cannot control. The way certain people no longer have the same emotional power over your peace. The way your spirit instinctively pulls towards stillness instead of chaos. You are changing, even if the outside world has not fully caught up to it yet. There will still be uncertain days ahead. There will still be moments when old fears try to return, when loneliness whispers familiar lies, when waiting feels heavy again. But something inside you knows now that silence does not automatically mean you are forgotten. You have already lived through enough hidden protection to understand that not everything delayed is denied. Sometimes life pauses certain things because your spirit needs time to awaken before your future fully arrives. And maybe that is why you found yourself here tonight, listening to these words while the rest of the world keeps moving outside your window. Not by accident, not because you are weak, but because some part of your spirit was finally ready to stop interpreting every closed door as the end of your story. The night outside is quiet now. The glow from your phone screen has softened across the room. Somewhere beyond the noise of your fears and unanswered questions, a calmer version of yourself is beginning to emerge. Not rushed, not perfect, just quieter, steadier, more aware of what truly matters. And for the first time and longer than you realize, you are no longer standing at the edge of losing yourself. You are standing at the beginning of returning to who you were meant to become all along.